Hi everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Steve Jablonsky. Steve's scoring career began in 1997 when he started writing additional music and arrangements for films such as Smilla's Sense of Snow, Armageddon, Ants, Enemy of the State, Pearl Harbor, and Pirates of the Caribbean. In 2003, he received one of his first big assignments, scoring the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was produced by Michael Bay, who Steve has worked with on many occasions. In his career, Steve has not only written music for the highly successful TV series Desperate Housewives, but he also went on to write music for films like Steamboy, The Islands, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the whole Transformers franchise, Gangster Squad, Ender's Game, Pain and Gain, and most recently Skyscraper, the latest film starring Dwayne Johnson. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. That was quite an intro. Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome, more than welcome. um, Steve, in 1997 you started working at Remote Control Productions. Back then it was still called Media Ventures. What do you think was the most important lesson you learned back then? Something that has been essential for your successful career?
Wow, that's a great question. I learned so many things, but if I had to pick one, I think it would be how to communicate with directors and producers and studios. It's something I don't know that you can necessarily learn in college or in school. I would sit there as an assistant, or I started as an intern and then became an assistant composer, but I would get to see interactions between Harry Gregson Williams and Hans Zimmer and Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott and Tony Scott and all of these top filmmakers, and just watching them communicate and to see how they collaborate and come up with ideas, and that to me was the most invaluable thing. You can learn music in school, but that sort of thing you cannot really learn. You have to experience it, and so I think to be able to do big giant movies like Transformers or things like that, you have to set aside the fact that it's terrifying that you have a completely blank slate, and you have to come up with hours of music, and you're on a schedule and all of these very stressful things, and just how to deal with that and make sure that the filmmakers are getting what they want, and if they're not, figuring out how to give them what they want, how to fix what you're doing to make sure that they're happy, and so that I would point to that as probably the most valuable thing I learned from all those great people I was able to work with.
Do you feel that every project you've worked on so far has been especially stressful, or do you think there is a large, difference on every project as far as the time constraints are concerned?
Yeah, that's one very important thing. How much time do you have? That can definitely add stress. But early in my career, I think things were a bit more stressful because I was still learning. And you mentioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003.
Yeah.
I was frankly terrified. I knew what I wanted to do musically, but just it was the first film that was going to say music by me, and I remember the first meeting with Michael Bay where he came in to listen to music, and I was so nervous. You want to do a great job, and I worked endlessly, hours and hours, to make sure that at least I thought the score was good. That's all you can really do as a composer, write a score that you feel good about, and hopefully other people agree with you. But so as I did a few more films, I got slightly more confident. I still get nervous to this day, don't get me wrong, but the nerves kind of go away. You know what you need to do, and you need to how to communicate with these people. And something like the Transformers, which is just such a huge thing before you even start. It's going to be big, and everybody's going to want to see it, and everybody's going to listen to what music you write and critique it, and so that was maybe a little more stressful just because it was such a massive thing. and we knew it was big. So, but they're all stressful in their own way. But yeah, if you have 3 weeks to write a score, that is incredibly stressful. I actually try to avoid those type of projects because I think unless it's for a friend, then maybe I will do it. But I just don't know that you can properly do a film that quickly unless you have a team of people working on it, which sometimes that's required. But I try to avoid it if I can.
Did you have to write Texas Chainsaw in 3 weeks?
No, not at all. No, that I don't actually even remember how much time I had, but that one, it was usually you get hopefully you get at least 2 months. That's a good amount of time. You want more than that, I think, because I like to spend several weeks just working on themes, not even writing music for the picture yet, just working on pieces of music and figuring out what the musical language is for that film. So that I always hope or try to take films where there is enough time for me to do that. So that's but no, I definitely had more time than 3 weeks. I'm trying to think if I had the one that comes to mind is, again, you mentioned when I helped on Pirates of the Caribbean, the first film.
Yeah.
It was I'm sure it's infamous for being very quick project, and there's so many composers listed on that for a reason. I think it may have been 3 or 4 weeks, and it was a huge undertaking, but yeah, that hasn't happened too often, fortunately.
Can you disclose which scenes is scored on the first Pirates?
Oh wow, I don't quite remember. I do remember the one scene I remember because it was just so much fun is Jack Sparrow is, I think he's being walked out. It's early in the film. He's being walked out on a plank maybe, and it's tense, and he escapes, and he's swinging around on a rope. And it's been years since I've seen the film, so I don't quite remember. But I do remember doing one big action scene where he escapes, and we get to play the big hero theme. It was a lot of fun. Other than that, I can't quite remember. But
you just mentioned that you like to work up front on, theme development. So are you basically inspired by conversations with the screenwriters, directors, producers?
Yeah, exactly. When I start a project, I absorb as much information as I can from all of those people you mentioned. And if there is any footage to look at, I will look at that. A lot of times there isn't yet. So I'll look at, sometimes they have concept artwork to look at, and obviously I'll read the script and start working on ideas from that. Inevitably, once you see the film, things change a little bit because the film, if I read a script, I might imagine the film a certain way in my head. And then when you see it, it's going to be different, So you adjust, and maybe I throw everything out. And like I did a film called The Island.
Yeah.
Obey, and I had some ideas in my head from the script, and I was working on some ideas. And then the first thing he showed me was that opening sequence, the dream sequence on the boat. And I literally threw everything out that I had done and wrote the piece that is there now in the film, because the visuals were so inspiring to me in a different way than the script was. And a lot of times that happens. You just see it and you go, wow, okay, that sparked a whole nother idea that I wouldn't have thought of had I not seen these amazing visuals. So it's a combination, I guess.
I absolutely enjoyed The Island. Actually, I have to watch it again. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I think it's one of Michael Bay's best movies. At least that's me.
I agree. I feel I'm sad, Frank, that it didn't do so well at the box office. I think
surprisingly, yeah.
Surprisingly, and I remember people asking me before it came out, what is The Island? Is it a TV show? Is it the advertising, I think, wasn't great, and it confused a lot of people. And even Michael Bay told me, he's like, people think this is a TV show. It's like they thought like Survivor, people stuck on an island and they have to somehow get off. And I felt terrible. Oh my God, we have this cool movie and nobody knows what it is, so they're not gonna go to the theater and spend their hard-earned money to see something with it. They don't know what it is, and I don't know. It seems later on people have discovered it and told me they really enjoy it, but when it first came out, unfortunately, not many people went to see it.
Do you generally or sometimes write a suite of material and then later, dissect it into several cues?
Yeah, exactly. That's something I learned with working with Hans Zimmer and Harry Gregson Williams. They Hans in particular would work that way, write these long pieces of music, and it makes so much sense because it's a way you can figure out the language of the film. If you start a film and you immediately try to score scenes, you don't really know what your language is yet. So that's why I like to take those as much of the time as I can, honestly, to come up to write these suites. Maybe one theme is a hero theme, and then the bad guy theme, or whatever. Just a bunch of pieces of music that you can then send to the director and the editors and producers, whoever wants to hear them, and they listen. They can listen to it in their cars and just get used to it and start to like it, or give you notes what's not working. And a lot of times, the editors will take the music while they're cutting the picture and start putting it in different scenes and experimenting with it, which is really cool. And they'll send it back to me and say, "What do you think of this?" And I'll go, "Yeah, that's great. I wouldn't have thought to do that." So that's the kind of cool thing of just writing all this music that you can hand over, and they can experiment with it, and new ideas spark from that. It's a cool way to work, I think. I don't know how many other composers do that. I'm guessing a lot of them do, but that's the way I love to work.
Do you think there is a certain project which you would describe as a defining project in your whole career, or a project that defines your sounds and that kind of paved the way for who you are today as a composer?
That's a good question. I mean, everybody knows me for one thing, the Transformers, and after that first film, I got so many phone calls and emails and things from all different filmmakers and directors that probably didn't know who I was before that, and I got a lot of job offers from that. They just thought it was, they liked it. It resonated with them somehow. They liked the themes and the emotion or whatever, and
Yeah.
so I think that probably would be it. I've done a lot of films that I'm very proud of, but that one is the one that I think introduced me to people who didn't know my name before that.
The first Transformers came out in 2007, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I think the first two Transformers movies have the best score. If I had to decide of all the Transformers films that you've worked on, I would go with the first and the second one. Those two scores are absolutely outstanding.
Oh, thanks very much. One of the things I love about having done 5 of these movies is because every one I speak to or that reaches out to me on social media or whatever, everyone has a different favorite. And it's not always this, it's not always everybody goes, "I love the first one." People go, "I love the 5th one," or the 4th one, or the 3rd one. I hear a lot of people saying the 3rd one is their favorite. So I love that somehow that all the scores are reaching people in different ways, and different people are responding to different things. Had everyone picked the same score as their favorite, then I think, oh, I must have really screwed up the other 4. But it seems there's a lot of variety of fans out there who respond to each of the scores in a good way, which I feel good about. But thank you for the compliment. I'm glad you liked the first 2.
Absolutely. I mean, I like the others as well, but those two in particular, stood out to me. And I think many fans, especially young fans, are familiar with your Transformers sound and also the scores you wrote for Michael Bay, Pain and Gain, and The Island. But one of the scores that you wrote pretty early on after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which remains one of my favorites of yours, is Steam Boy.
Oh, right. Yeah, thanks. I had a lot of fun on that. That was an interesting one. It came through a very famous engineer, Alan Meyerson, who
Yeah.
yeah, he records and mixes a lot of Hans's stuff, and the director and producers reached out to him because they knew that he works with a lot of Hollywood composers, and they basically said to him, "We have this film Steam Boy, and we want a big Hollywood sound for the music. Who should we hire?" And he sent them CDs, demo CDs from I don't know how many, 5, 10 composers, and I was one of them because I was friends with him, and they, fortunately for me, they responded to my CD, and that's the odd kind of way I got the job, and they were so great to work with, and I'd love to do another animated film someday. It's not. I think that might be the only one I've ever done, but it was really fun and sort of just very organic, all orchestral, not a lot of electronics, and I don't know. I had a great time on it.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it's one of those scores that you can basically listen to over and over again, and it's still, I mean, it was basically 14 years ago, but the score simply is still relevant, and it totally matters because also for today's standards, it's something you don't get to listen to on a daily basis because the whole industry has changed so much.
Yeah.
And Steam Boy is, one of the prime examples of the past 10, 15 years of how much fun film music can be and what it can do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thank you for saying. I agree. I think things have definitely shifted. Just from my perspective, things have gotten a lot darker and moodier and more electronic, which is, I don't say it's a bad thing. It's just different. Things have changed a bit, and I'm always looking for a project where I can do something like that again. It's a rare thing. I don't see them very, very often.
When you're working on a project, when exactly do you feel or know that a piece of music that you've written is the right thing for a movie?
That's a good question. I think it has to, for me, it has to live in the film for a little while. Like for Skyscraper, for example, there was a theme I wrote that for the family, and everyone loved it, and then we put it in the movie, and people liked it, and for some reason I just still wasn't 100% sure that it was the right thing. I felt good about when I initially wrote it. I felt good that it was the right direction, but you never really know until it lives in the film for a while and you start putting other music in and see how it all fits together. So I guess for me, it has to, and in the past I've had, a director might approve a theme or a cue, and then a month later go, I was never really sure about this one, and so the directors have the right to change their minds right up until the end, and occasionally it happens. So I never fully feel confident, and like,
okay,
as soon as you let your guard down, then that's when something bad's going to happen. But but the thing is, when I won't even present something to a director or whoever unless I feel good about it. So that it has to start from a place where I already feel good about it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Have you experienced many situations when a director said, well, I love it, let's do it, and some producer or executive intervenes?
Let's see. Yeah, occasionally. It doesn't happen too often, but trying to think of any examples. Like usually studios and producers, they let in my experience, they let the director do what they think is right, and because they hired this particular director for a reason, they liked his or her vision, and so they generally let them do their thing. But yes, studio executives or producers very often have comments on the music. They say, this or that. Well, I'm not sure why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And then we'll all just talk about it. And maybe the director will say, you know what, I like what you're saying. Let's try that. Or they might say, I really like what we have. Let's not change it. And it's just a discussion, really. So it does happen, frequently, because there's so much money involved in these films and so many people involved that you have to, listen to the producers and hear what they have to say. Because often it's a great idea, and you go, oh, that's we didn't think of that. So thank you for. So yeah, it's definitely all of these films are collaborations between not just me and the director, but even the editors and producers, and the director's wife might come in and say something. You never know. Whoever might be walking by, we'll take, if it's a good idea, we'll take it from anybody, honestly.
Skyscraper is actually your most recent score, and the film, as I mentioned before, also stars Dwayne Johnson, and I think Dwayne Johnson also served in a producing capacity on this one. Was he very active as far as the music was concerned? Did he kind of ask you to write some music that would fit his character in the best possible way?
I didn't deal with him directly early on, but I knew that through the director, Rawson Thurber, who works with Dwayne a lot, and they're good friends, I knew that what Rawson was telling me was also from Dwayne. Like they had discussed these things before, so I knew that if I was following Rawson's direction, then I would also be following Dwayne's direction, and which was basically this: treat Dwayne's character, even though he looks like a superhero, just physically, he's so big.
Yeah.
But musically, let's not treat him like a superhero, because this is just a man who wants to save his kids and his wife from this burning building, and that's all he wants. He doesn't want to go beat up bad guys. He will if he has to, but it's just about him trying to save his family. So that's why I wrote a simpler theme on guitar, as opposed to 10 French horns or something like that. And later in the process, I did actually meet Dwayne at one of our preview screenings, and he came up to me. We talked about the music. He said he really liked this one particular theme, the family theme, and I thought, that's great. We're all on the same page, and occasionally I would get little notes from Dwayne through the director about things that we would adjust, but nothing big. I think he seemed pretty happy with the music overall, and he's a really nice guy. Really, even though he's the biggest star in the world, super nice and easy to talk to and discuss. He was very active in the process of making the film, not so much the music, but just the story and the editing and all of these things. He had some great ideas, I thought.
Rawson Thurber also wrote the screenplay, right? Do you feel that a writer-director is even more specific as to what they really want?
I don't think so. That's a good question. No, he's... I think the film is just more a part of them, more a part of their DNA, because they came up with the whole concept, and they've been living with it for longer than a director who's been hired perhaps after the script was already written. But I think, in my experience, most directors, they know the script so well, and they have the movie in their head already. They know what they want, and they're very specific, even if they didn't write the script. But it was cool to work with a writer director, because there aren't that many, at least from my perspective. I don't think there are that many. A lot of directors don't write their own scripts, which is not a bad thing, but But it was just cool and I kept telling that to Ross, and I'm like, this is a really cool story you wrote, and so he perhaps he understood the story just slightly better than directors who don't write their own scripts, I guess. But no, it was the experience working with him was fairly similar to working with other directors.
If I'm correct, you worked with him for the first time.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to communicate under those circumstances as opposed to working with someone like Michael Bay that you've known for years? Do you think directors hold back to a certain degree and try not to be as strict or demanding?
It all depends on the personality, honestly. Everyone's different, and that's part of what I really enjoy about this job and working with people I've never worked with, is figuring out how they communicate, and if they say something, is that really what they mean, or do they mean something else? And Rawson, I could tell immediately from our first meeting that he was just a really laid-back guy, really genuine. He knew what he wanted, and he's a good communicator. And so he would give me good notes. He wasn't like rude or anything. He would just if he didn't like something, he would tell me he didn't like it, and if he did like something, he would tell me he loved it. And that's all you want really from a director. You definitely don't want them to hold back, because eventually it will have to come out, because at the end of the process they're going to feel it and go, you know what, I never liked that piece of music, and you go, oh no, I thought you did. So the directors at this level, they're just such good communicators. They know that you need the feedback from them, and if they don't like something, they have to tell you. And they're directing 100 people a day, from I don't know, makeup and costumes and everything. They have to give so many people so many directions. So I think they're just used to it, and yeah, I guess every director has a different way of communicating whether they like something or not. But Rawson was I found him very easy to work with.
What do you think is the best way to prepare for a film of this kind in order to write an effective score?
I think, well, I guess you should really understand what the director's vision is. Because as I tell young composers all the time, that for me, movies are not a stage for my music to be presented to the world. I am hired to help tell a story. I'm there to help tell the director's story, the screenwriter's story, all these people. It's their story. I'm helping to tell it. So I think that you need to make sure you're supporting the vision of what everyone is trying to do. If you're off doing your own thing, then it's not going to work. And so just making sure you're on exactly the same page from the beginning, which again is why I like to write these pieces of music, just to make sure everyone's liking the sounds and themes and the motifs or whatever. If you have a good foundation that you start with, then everything from that should be pretty smooth. Yeah, you'll hit bumps along the way, but if you start in a good place, then the process should be fairly smooth.
How do you actually accomplish to underscore big action sequences and also find the right tone for protagonist and antagonist?
Well, I absorb as much information as I can from the director, and how dark do you want to make this character, or how complex or how simple. And with a film like Skyscraper that moves really quickly, the story is always moving, and there are not long extended scenes for me to play long extended themes. So for this particular film, I had to write simpler motifs and ideas that I could, if I had 9 seconds to be emotional, then I could squeeze in these few notes and hopefully establish what I need to, and then we can switch to the action theme. And like the bad guy, for instance, he's kind of always lurking, but it's not there are no great long scenes of him being evil, and we decided to not overplay that, to just maybe give him more of a rhythmic motif as opposed to a big Darth Vader kind of bad guy thing, which, awesome. That's the kind of stuff I love. It's what's inspired me when I was a kid. But for this film, we decided to play it a little simpler, play it a little more real, and not quite so Hollywood thematic. There were a couple cues where I decided to test the waters, and I tried a little bit of French horn, and the director actually said to me, and I thought he might. It was kind of a test. He said, I feel like we're getting out of Skyscraper and we're going into a Marvel movie right now. And I totally understood what he meant, and it wasn't the right language for this film. And that's the thing, you have to find out what the right language is. So I took out the French horns, I simplified it right down, and he loved it. So it was just simpler, less is more. It was the approach we took for this one. Whereas like a Marvel movie, it's so over the top that you need a dozen French horns and everything, and all the trombones, and just blasting all the time. And so it's just a different kind of thing, I guess.
Did you have to rewrite many cues at the 11th hour of the?
Let's see. Not really. The only, because fortunately I was able to work on it for several months, so we were in a pretty good place by the end. The only tricky thing with these films, these CGI heavy films, is that a lot of the visual effects don't come in until the very end, the 11th hour. And when they do, you realize the timing is not quite right, or the editors need to adjust things, and things are always going to change when the visual effects come in. So you need to be ready to scramble a little bit and fix anything that needs to be fixed. But I'm used to that now. I know that's going to happen, so it's not a surprise. It is a little stressful when it does happen, even though I'm ready for it. But because you have to do a lot of work in a little amount of time. But it's part of the job.
How many hours do you usually work on a big project like this? A day?
A day. Let's see. Probably 12 to 15, I'd say. That's... unless it's like there's a really harsh deadline that we need to hit for some reason, then it might creep into the 15, 18 hours. If something happens, but I like to keep it between 12 and 15 if I can. Leave me a little time to spend with my kids and wife. And
do you like to specifically work on projects that give you a certain amount of leeway, or that don't have a tight deadline, so you can actually avoid having to work around the clock?
If you asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said no. I'll take anything. I'll work 20. But now I'm a little older now, and I have kids, and I really try to not to not do that. Like I several times in my career, I've taken films that are the schedules are like right on top of each other. So you're basically scoring two films at the same time, and it's just so much work and so many hours, and it really drains you, and there's a risk of burning out. And so I try as much as I can to space things out so that doesn't happen. And yes, I have definitely turned down projects that need a score in 4 weeks, 3 weeks, but just because I don't want to do that to myself or to my family, and unless it's something really good, or like I said, for a friend. But if I can avoid it, then I would like to take films that I actually have some time. My favorite thing is when a director calls me for a film that he hasn't even shot yet, or she hasn't even shot yet, and we start talking music even before they've shot anything. And so I might not write that early, but at least we can. I feel more a part of the whole filmmaking process, which is cool. I think that's happening a bit more now. Either before or during the shoot that's when I got hired for Skyscraper, during while he was shooting. So I thought that's pretty cool. That to me is the right way to do it, because music is such an important part of the film, and it's going to be there, and you don't want somebody coming in, a month before the movie comes out and trying to plaster music everywhere. It's
being able to work on a project at such an early stage is actually a privilege, and it sounds like a best case scenario, as opposed to a director calling you, telling you, well, my film opens up in 5 weeks, but I have no music.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. I think it's better to get people involved, and from my experience, directors are learning that, or most directors feel that way. They know the value of bringing people on, because it also gives them more time to, if they don't like something, then there's time to redo it, and maybe they don't like the direction you're going, and we can have a discussion and go another direction. And it's if you have a month to do everything, then there's no time. It's just you got to get it done.
But I think there are many movies, or have been many movies out there, when a score needed to be produced within 4 weeks, 8 weeks. So it's I think it's really extremely tough.
It is. One of the best examples of that, and it's not one of my movies, was Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know the story, but Black Hawk Down was going to be released at a certain time, and they decided we should get it out before the end of the year so that it could be considered for Oscar consideration for the Oscar Academy Awards.
Yeah.
It has to be released before the end of that year. And the way I understand it, Ridley Scott and Jerry Bruckheimer actually called Hans and said, the only way we're going to move this release date is if you tell us it's okay, because it's going to land on you. You have to write this score. And he said, I'll do it. And he basically didn't leave the studio. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. He got all of these people, all of these musicians into a room, and he put up like camouflage on the walls just to make it feel like they were in battle. It was pretty amazing, and they would just work. And the score, I mean, as you know, is amazing. It's fantastic, and it just came from this kind of unique thing that Hans created, this room of him and musicians just working around the clock, coming up with all of these great pieces of music. And so it occasionally it works perfectly, like in that case.
I read somewhere at some point that the score had to be produced within 2 weeks.
I don't know that it was that quick. It wasn't much longer than that. I feel like it was more in the 3 to 4 week range, but I could be mistaken. I don't think it was quite 2 weeks, but it wasn't much more than that. Maybe we'll call it 3. I don't exactly remember. It was fast.
That's stiff enough.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
Well, but the same goes for Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, there were, as you mentioned before, there were so many people involved. I think 8 guys, 9 guys. I don't know the exact number, but having to coordinate an effort like this, it must be so stressful. Cues need to be finished, then you basically take somebody else's material and arrange a different cue. I mean, it must be stressful as hell.
Yeah, it was stressful. There was a lot of running around and big meetings with lots of people in the same room talking about things. But if you're going to have anybody leading that charge, Hans. I know it's Klaus Badelt's film, but Hans was instrumental, obviously, in just making that all happen. That's his specialty.
Speaking about all these projects, I would also love to talk about album production. As I understand, you also produced the album of Skyscraper. What is essential to you when it comes to an album? Is it listening experience, or do you want to present as much music as possible in a chronological order? What is your criteria for that?
It's a bit of both of those, actually. I think listening experience is number one. I don't. Does it's one of the more important things is deciding what not to put on, because these movies have so much music, and I try not to put on cues that sound like other cues, and I try to diversify, make sure every little idea of the score is represented um, as well as it can be on an album. And just for me personally, I've always liked scores that go in chronological order, so that you can almost feel like you're watching the movie again, and you go, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. Or that's always how I've liked to listen to scores, and so that's how I compile them in basically in order. And the suites that I write in the beginning of the project, those are always valuable for the album, because they're basically full-length versions of themes that when you use them in the movie, they get cut up and shifted around and to fit the picture. And so, but the suites are the full idea, so I can just put those on the album, and those are always really good to have for the album. So it's a combination of cues and the suites, and just trying to go in somewhat order. Sometimes I change it up just for listening experience, but yeah, that's basically how I do it.
Where did you record the orchestral parts? Los Angeles or London?
No, it was London at Abbey Road, and that's probably my favorite studio in the world. And the director said to me early on that one of his dreams is to record at Abbey Road someday, and it was a not so subtle hint that that's where he wanted to go. and I told him, I said, that's already where I was thinking of going. There are a lot of reasons why one might record in Los Angeles or London. It's usually to do with boring union legal stuff. Like for Skyscraper, I just couldn't record in Los Angeles. Otherwise, I probably would have. But so you have to take it to another country, and yeah, we went to London, and he was out of his mind excited about being there. He brought his family, and his family sat out in the room while we were recording these emotional string cues, and it was a nice experience to see a director so excited about that part of the process. I guess he hasn't done a lot of orchestral recording, is what he told me. A lot of his films have been comedies, and it's not quite as orchestral as this was.
How many days did you record in London?
Let's see. There were 2 sets of. I think we ended up recording 5 or 6 days, and often what happens, you'll record a few days to get the bulk of the score, and then you'll have a backup day later on, a pickup day we call it, where you pick up any last minute changes. The visual effects come in, you have to change a cue. So we had one of those days later towards the end that we could jump in and record things we needed. And that one I did from my studio, and it wasn't feasible for me to fly there for one day and fly back. So I did it from my studio in Santa Monica in Los Angeles, and those are always brutal, because it's you're recording at 2 a.m. until 10 a.m. My time, so it was a little rough, but I think it all worked out.
The film basically it takes place in Hong Kong, right?
Yes.
Did you have any discussions up front as to how you might incorporate the setting musically?
We did talk about that, and we decided that the actual story isn't that. The fact that we're in Hong Kong isn't particularly a strong element of the story. It's a setting, but it's not. There's not a lot of cultural aspect to the film. I mean, Zhao, the man the billionaire who builds the skyscraper, he's the main Chinese character, and then there are other, the police chief and all of these Chinese characters, but it's not they're just people in the film who happen to be Chinese. It wasn't, and we did briefly talk about maybe Zhao, the billionaire, giving him a slight edge of slight bit of Chinese instrumentation, but the more I played with it, the more I thought it would just seem a little forced or a little unnecessary and maybe insensitive even, just because he's Chinese. I didn't think we needed to give him a Chinese instrument, so
Yeah.
I just wrote a theme for him without any. So, but yeah, you're right. There are no Chinese instruments in the score. I didn't. We chose not to go that road.
The album will be released physically on August 3rd, right?
What I've been told is August 3rd in the U.S. and August 10th in Europe, or maybe just the UK. Specifically, I was told August 10th in the UK. I'm assuming that means all of Europe, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah,
It has been released digitally already, a couple of days ago. That's actually a huge trend which has been going on for several years, to release it digitally up front, and then 2 weeks later the physical album is also released, thankfully.
yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm glad you like that. It's sort of a battle. I don't know if that's the right word, to get physical CDs made, because they're just not that popular anymore. But I do know that people who enjoy film scores, they like to have a physical soundtrack to add to their collection, or at least a lot of them do. And the record label Milan Records is one of the best soundtrack labels around.
Yeah, sure.
They understand this, and they will make sure to put some sort of physical copy of the soundtrack available for the people who want it.
I mean, the only negative aspect about buying a CD that I could think of is that CDs take up an enormous amount of space. Where,
I don't. I mean, I don't buy them that often myself. I have to admit, I listen to a lot of things digitally, and it's just so convenient. And there's so many things available. You can listen to 20 different artists in an hour easily, and not do anything but be holding your phone and just tapping.
Totally. I mean, these days it's easier to find out if you want to buy an album. Many years ago, all you had were some 20-second, 30-second clips of a score, and then you had to decide whether or not you would like to buy it, or based on you having seen the film, you had to decide whether or not you were going to get the album. And these days, there are so many options, legal options, of course, to stream an album at any time, as many times as you want. You pay, I don't know, $6, $10 a month, and then you get to pick every album and listen to it over and over again.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the convenience part of it is great, and most people I hear from, I'd say maybe not most, half of them want the physical CD, and half of them just want it on Spotify, because that's where everyone listens to everything. So and I'm just glad they're listening. I know it's a lot of artists are, and rightly so, they question, because like you just said, $6 a month, you can listen to whatever you want, and you go, is that $6 actually paying for all of these artists, or how does that work? How are the artists getting any royalties?
Royalties, right?
And I know that just from my own experience, there's not a lot of royalties from this, as opposed to people going out and buying a CD. But at the same time, if it means that 100,000 more people are going to be able to listen to this soundtrack or something I've written, then I'm okay with that. I'd rather they have it available easily to them, and not get the royalties than they don't hear it at all.
Yeah, totally. If I'm not mistaken, your Turtles score was also released digitally as a digital exclusive, right? There's no physical album of that.
That is true. Yeah, that it kind of depends the studio you're working with. I think Paramount, who did the Turtles, is a proponent of just releasing digital because it does. See that one, for example, we did record in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and there are all sorts of things of residuals, and if a soundtrack sells a certain amount, then the studio has to pay the musicians. It's all union stuff that I won't bore you with, but that sort of thing goes into play as well, of studios deciding, let's just
Totally.
put it on Spotify. It's kind
Yeah.
of it's a very evolving thing. It's still changing. A lot of the rules and everything is changing to be more fair, or I'm not even sure how it's going to end up, but
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, it's of course a financial aspect and also politics, of course, but the same, the first score of the Turtles, which was scored by Brian Tyler, suffered from the same fate. It also was not released physically.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's again, I think it's different studios have different policies, and a lot of studios these days just decide they don't want to deal with those financial burdens that come with putting out a physical CD, and it's easier to do digital, and they think that's how everybody listens anyway. So, and they're kind of right. Hard to argue. So I don't, but yeah,
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean,
yeah.
the record sales might have declined, but I still know an awful lot of people that are still into buying CDs. I know many collectors, and I don't think records are dead. I mean, there are many people out there that tend to say, well, um, digital, that's the future, and nobody buys CDs anymore. That's not true.
No.
There are still many people, as you pointed out, that want to have a physical release, and I am one of those.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. I know definitely, at least from this in the soundtrack world, people do love having that. I don't know. Obviously, if Taylor Swift releases something, they're going to make a bunch of CDs. But I don't know how many. I don't know the statistics of an artist like Taylor Swift. How many CDs does she sell versus people going on to Spotify or whatever and listening to her music that way? I'm not sure if. I'm assuming that even the pop world has been affected greatly by
Absolutely.
and but yeah, I just from my own experience of people reaching out to me, I do get a lot of requests. Please put that out on physical CD, and I have a great collection of scores from when I was younger, when before Spotify existed, and I loved buying these things and having them on my shelf, and but yeah, even now I've kind of gone away from that. But I do like, if possible, to provide. That's why it's great to have labels like Milan, excuse me, or there's this other label, La La Land,
Yeah.
who are great also to work with. They put out a couple of the Transformers scores when
Yeah.
Paramount didn't want to, but we were able to make a deal and do this, and
Yeah. I remember there these editions by La La Land, especially when it comes to Transformers. It's like 120 minutes of score
yeah,
on one of those editions, and that's a lot. And speaking of Transformers, I always wondered, and I was really surprised and also a bit upset that the third one was not released physically. It didn't make sense to me at all, as the Transformers movies have been enormously popular, and both the films and the scores. So it didn't make any sense at all not to release the CD of the third one.
I agree, and it's a fight I've been fighting for a while. That at that time it was sort of transitioning away from physical CDs, and I was just so busy working on the score and trying to finish the film that I let it slip. I could have fought more and maybe had it done, but the studio didn't want to do it, and I said, okay, I'll deal with this later, but I need to go finish the movie, and then it just never got sorted out. What I'd like to do is go back and either release, and I don't want to get people's hopes up because this is very
Yeah, sure.
preliminary right now, but I release the things that have been gone unavailable. What I've been fighting to get them to put it back on iTunes. If I understand correctly, you can't get it anywhere. You can't even stream it.
No,
It's
you
just-
can't. You can't.
It's gone from the face of the earth, which I think is ridiculous. That really upsets me because I don't understand why that is. I've spent I literally a couple years every now and then I'll say, can we do it now? Can we make it available now? What have the rules changed? I still don't understand what.
Yeah.
And I can't I've not gotten anywhere, and it is frustrating that at least it should be somewhere to listen to, and so that's my goal definitely, is to make that one re-available somehow, and
It should
maybe
be.
someday put all the make a box or something for.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Steve, speaking of Michael Bay, you've worked with him so many times. Is there any favorite Michael Bay story you would like to share with me here?
See, I think, and I look back at this as the beginning of our relationship. Like as I did, as you mentioned, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that was kind of my first film where I was the composer for him. You know, I wasn't helping Hans or helping Harry or Trevor Rabin. It was me by myself, and so I wrote the score, and we were at the mix stage at the very end of the project, and we watched the whole film just to make sure everything was okay and check for any mistakes or anything. And he was sitting next to me. I was there, and the film finished, and he looked at me and he said, "Wow, man, you did a great job, and we didn't pay you shit." But that was, and he's right. They didn't pay me anything, and I mean they paid me a little bit, but in the grand scheme of composer fees, it was very small. And I was happy to do it. You know, that's how you start in this business. I would have done it for free, honestly, but I thought that was a very classic Michael Bay compliment. Like he was thanking me for the good job but he had to point out that they didn't pay me anything. But that's. And everybody, of course, burst out laughing, and I took it as a great compliment. Like he approved of what I had done, and from that he asked me to do The Island. So that was like my test. I think what can you do? And I was actually surprised that he asked me to do The Island. I thought, okay, I'll do this horror movie, and then he'll go back to using Hans or whatever. But no, I was very flattered. He's a good guy. I know he's got a reputation, but he's a very good person and like a loyal, you know, to give me all these opportunities when I was so early on in my career. But that's a story I always tell people because it's pretty classic Michael Bay.
That's cool. I mean, you basically became his go-to composer.
Right. Yeah. No, he's been great. It's been great to work with him, and he's got so many. Obviously, most of them were Transformers, but I really had fun doing the other things as well. Pain and Gain was one of my favorite films that I've ever worked on. It's just because we got to do something so wildly different than we'd done before, and I think we both had a great time.
I've heard Michael Bay is very detail specific. Would you agree on that? I mean,
yeah, definitely. He's for sure a director who has the entire film in his head. You know, he does visuals like nobody else, and they're all in his head. It's crazy and he's got a very specific memory for sound, not just music, but sound. You know, he'll hear a cue, and I may have changed one tiny sound for some reason. I don't know. And he'll go, "What? Wait, there was something different there before, wasn't there?" And a lot of times I'll go, I actually don't remember. And then when I investigate, I go, "Oh yeah, I did. I changed that sound a week ago." And it's amazing that when he picks up on these things, he's very, so yeah, to answer your question, he is very detail oriented. He gets really inside of his movies and really knows them like the back of his hand.
One more question about his films. I wonder why you didn't score 13 Hours, Soldiers of Benghazi. Can you disclose why you didn't write the score for this one?
Right. Well, it was partly a timing thing, and because I was on, I believe it was Deepwater Horizon
Mm-hmm.
for Peter Berg at the time, and he and so he reached out to Hans and Lauren, and he asked Hans to write a theme, which I think he may have done. I'm not entirely sure. And then Lauren did a fantastic job with the rest of the score, and so it was just that's how it went. There's no big story behind it. It was mainly scheduling. I was busy with Peter Berg, who's another filmmaker I work with a lot, who's
Yeah.
fantastic. But yeah, that was mainly it. But it was good. It was nice to have Lauren do a score for Michael, because I love Lauren. He's very talented, and he's been helping Hans for so long that it was good to, and now especially he's getting all of these great projects, and he's a really talented, good guy. I'm glad he's sort of expanding and becoming a top guy in the industry.
Right. What's next for you, Steve? Are you allowed to talk about this?
Well, maybe in a few weeks I'll be able to. I haven't signed on. There are a couple things I've met with directors, but I'm always superstitious before anything's official. I don't have any deal yet, and then things might fall apart. If I tell you what it is, it'll definitely not happen. But it's pretty cool, cool stuff with directors I have not worked with. So, but yeah, maybe when I've signed my name on some papers, I can tell you,
Great.
or I'll feel more comfortable telling you. But yeah, there's definitely things. I'll be writing more music later this year. But I had always planned to take time off right now after Skyscraper, because my wife and I had a second child right in the middle of Skyscraper, and I told her that I'll take time off after Skyscraper, and then we can do some family things in the summer, and then
Sure.
I'll go back to work. It's nice to be able to do that. So that's what I'm doing now.
Steve, do you wish to add anything? Do you have anything to add on Skyscraper or anything else on your mind about your career?
I don't think so. I think you've asked as many great questions as I could come up with myself. So I don't.
Thank you.
Unless you think, yeah, no, they're very great, thoughtful questions. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Same here. Steve, thank you so much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I really loved talking to you. It was a huge pleasure talking about your career and some projects of the past, and of course your most recent one, Skyscraper. And I hope we get to talk really soon. Bye,
Sure.
Steve.